ladies and gentlemen, to episode number 181 of Let's Go Racing. Tyler Jones here with you. Happy to have you with us. Going to be joined by Bozi Tatarevic in just a little bit from right now, as he's got a fascinating story that he'll tell us of everything that he's been involved in motorsports, from everything from pit road to the coverage side of things on the media side. We'll get his perspective when he joins us coming up in just a little while from right now. Dominic Aragon here with me right off the top of the show. Dom, first off, let's break down what happened this week with Kyle Larson dominating at Kansas. First driver ever to lead over 200 laps at Kansas Speedway, set the all-time record, 220. He was up front. We saw some guys with opportunities, Chase Elliott, a few others, to potentially contend, but they could never get by that five machine, as they were just on it from the jump. And what I find interesting too, Dom, is that even as much as Kyle Larson dominated, it was still a good race. It was very entertaining. Just nobody had the horsepower or what it takes to compete with that number 5 car. They were just on a different level from everybody else, the way they dominated in the way they did.
The only wonder I have from that race, Tyler, would be Chase Elliott and that 9 team and that 17-second pit stop at the end of the race. That, man, that goes a different way. Maybe we see Chase Elliott take the victory there. But Kyle Larson pretty much put together what would be considered an almost perfect race, with sweeping the stages, leading the most laps, scoring 60 out of 61 possible points that you can maximum earn in a race. Didn't get the fastest lap. I think he did have that at one point. But you look at the bigger picture here. 3 wins this season, 3 wins in the last 8 races. And 32 career wins now, Tyler. Ties Dale Jarrett, the 1999 Cup Series champion. And I don't know about you, but when I think of that name, I think back to our childhood. We were watching NASCAR before we were working in the sport. And you think of Dale and his transcending in the 90s and how he got his late blooming, blossoming career, whatever you want to call it, kind of like how Martin Truex did in the late 2010s. And now Kyle Larson has tied him in a much shorter amount of time span. So we're talking somebody here. We're seeing greatness. He's entering the off week, if you will. We have the All-Star race, but as far as points races, he's the points leader entering the Coke 600. Oh, while he's trying to do the double as well in Indianapolis. So some pretty spectacular things. We're seeing that once in a generational talent that we see in NASCAR playing out right before our eyes.
And what a month for him, as he's got the Indy 500, Coke 600s here in a few weeks, the All-Star race, not to mention that he also is going to be busy with the high limits series that he does as well. I mean, so much going on for Kyle Larson. And Dom, I heard him talk about in the post race that there's not much that can translate necessarily from a win at Kansas to running in the Indianapolis 500. But nonetheless, it is a good start to the month for Kyle Larson as he gets ready to compete in these great events here.
I think the best quote I saw from his post-race press conference was talking about how he's entering as the points leader. He lost the regular season championship title by 1 point last year, and they were really big on trying to win that championship last year, and now he's the points leader. William Byron didn't have the best race, who had the points leaving or entering Kansas, rather. But with Kyle Larson now leading the points, first time he's done that all year, I would think, at least if maybe the skill set doesn't transfer over from a stock car to an open wheel car, momentum certainly has to.
Yeah, and I haven't seen the full schedule of things, but Dom, I wonder, is he going to miss much time? Whether it's like, with the All-Star race, with practice or qualifying sessions, or trying to balance out everything going on in the next couple of weeks. But even with that said, that Kyle Larson is going to put the best effort he can in everything he touches, one way or another.
There's 2 things that come to mind, and we can definitely touch on this later in the show and next week. But number one, I do remember reading that if he were to advance to the final 6 there in the Indianapolis 500 qualifying, he may not be able to run for the pole because he's going to get back to North Wilkesboro for the All-Star race. And then you add the other element with President Donald Trump potentially being at the Indianapolis 500, if there's going to be some sort of FFA type thing or FAA thing, and if there's going to be a restriction on airspace. Those 2 things come to mind, but we can certainly break that down later.
Dom, tell us about this week's guest.
So this week, we've gotten to know him a little bit this week, and if you've been following along on Twitter or follow along his stuff on YouTube, Bozi, man, you want to talk about a depth of knowledge. on the sport, somebody who has worked in IMSA, somebody who worked for Jimmy Johnson, Legacy Motor Club, I believe in 2023, as well as NASCAR and various other endeavors, motorsports consulting. He is truly the Bozi of all trades, Tyler. He has a really cool skill set. I'm sure he gets that a lot, but what really caught my eye a few weeks back was all of the issues that you saw at Martinsville with Josh Berry, Austin Cindric, and just the breakdown that Bozi was able to do, where whether you're a big gearhead or a casual fan or somewhere in the middle of that, made it very easy to understand. Felt like it was like in a classroom type experience. So, Bozi, thank you so much for joining us this week here on Let's Go Racing.
Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, no, awesome to see the interactions you have with the fans, and I know a lot of fans really enjoy seeing what you have to say, and you also do videos, and I think it's worth noting too, Tyler, that whenever there's a disqualification, I think that's the big thing here too, is that Bozi can just break it down on such a technical level where everybody can understand, and I think of like what happened with Jesse Love a few weeks back at Rockingham, or with Matt DiBenedetto and his penalty at Talladega. The depth there that you're able to provide, I think fans really truly appreciate the explanations.
No, I think it's helpful to understand what's going on because I think that helps everyone enjoy what's happening or at least explain why their driver is losing their spot in the race. So whether you're cheering for that driver or cheering against them, I think there's a it's helpful to have that understanding because if things are behind the curtain, it's hard for fans to accept that at times. And to NASCAR's credit, over the last year or two, they've done a really good job of showing the parts that have failed or parts that have been disqualified, which has definitely helped expand that. But using my knowledge as a mechanic and as somebody that's had to go through technical inspections, somebody that's been disqualified from technical inspections in the past, that's kind of the perspective I look at is, my first inclination is, all right, what rule was violated? What would I do here if I was playing with this part? And then, often ask people in the industry of like, hey, this is my thought. What do you guys think? And then try to explain it to fans.
And I think they certainly do appreciate that. And of course, it all starts somewhere. And we'd love for you to take us back to the beginning. David is notorious for asking our guests, so we'll throw the question to you. How did you get involved in racing? What sparked that? Was it maybe a family member? Was it an interest? How did the interest in racing and wanting to work in racing start for you?
It really just started with cars in general. So, growing up, me and my dad and my brother would always work on cars. My dad was a dealership mechanic for a while. So, through my teenage years, I worked on cars and kind of got to have maybe some better cars than some of my classmates because I would work on them myself and, fix them up and stuff like that. And I played a bunch of different sports growing up. Eventually in college, I played rugby, so I was always competitive. And eventually, I met some friends actually through writing. So I I worked in the tech industry for a while and just kind of started writing for fun, writing about modifying street cars. So nothing to do with race cars. Ended up working for a few different publications. And one of the editors I worked for, Jack Varuth, bought a Mazda MX-5 Cup car that had been raced and kind of put away. And he asked me and my brother to refurbish it. And once we did, he's like, hey, can you come help us do this? It was just like, endurance grassroots racing thing. So we're like, cool. So went up there, worked on the car, did pit stops, and that was my first racing experience. So that's really what got me into racing and like enjoy it. And then I saw, hey, there's competition aspect to this, something where I could bring kind of multiple passions together. So I ended up just trying to find other gigs and chasing stuff into SRO, which, won some races there. And that kind of picked me up a gig in IMSA Michelin Pilot Challenge, which is the sport series in IMSA, kind of the equivalent of Xfinity and NASCAR. And picked up some gigs there and then worked my way up to working for the Lexus program with Vassar Sullivan Racing. And then I've been there since 2020. So this is my fifth season with them. And then on the side, I've picked up kind of some fun gigs here and there. In 2023, I did some races with Legacy Motor Club, got to do the Daytona 500. So there's been all kinds of interesting things. But while all that's been going on, I kind of took my writing skill set that I used to write about production cars for places like Road and Track and motorsport.com and so on, and then parlayed that into writing in NASCAR. And I found a niche in my writing production cars doing technical explanations of why things work the way they do. So I kind of use that same skill set to explain why technical things work on race cars the way they do. So that's allowed me to, now write for a bunch of different places, but primarily I'm at Road and Track, motorsport.com, race car engineering, and it's a bunch of different levels. So I'll write, a lot more concise things for motorsport.com, but for race car engineers, sometimes there'll be 2 or 3 thousand word stories getting into deep detail on something because that's what the audience there looks for. And then Road and Track, it's often relating stuff to production cars because that's kind of how that stuff translates. So it's been really cool to be able to combine both. And then outside of that, I've tried to build an audience on social media to share stuff that I do in my work as mechanic and pit crew member, but also to be able to connect all these different pieces together and things that I find that I'm passionate about, I share, and fans often can see that and interact with that.
But Bozy, tell me this, from your perspective, I think you would be the right guy to ask about this. We've seen, a lot of talk. I think even more so recently about the decisions NASCAR has made when it comes to suspensions and penalties and all of that. And knowing what you know, do you believe that NASCAR gets it right most of the time? Are they fair? Do they go overboard? What's kind of your perspective on how they've handled things in that realm as of late?
I mean, I think they've been consistent recently, which is really the main thing I look for. So if everybody's getting the same type of penalty, I think that's something that I appreciate. And as far as the technical inspection stuff, disqualifications, penalties, after race weekends for cars that get torn down, I think they do a good job of being fair there, and I think a lot of it's just part of the game. So everybody's trying to push the limits, and especially in the Cup Series with the next gen car, there are only so many things you can do. So you're trying to push the limits on every single piece that you can, and that can often translate to failing technical inspections or failing on certain things in disqualifications. And we can see that play out multiple different ways. I think we saw that there are also some opportunities for things that may not necessarily have been straight out like performance tweak, but still end up failing because of the strict rules of the spec parts. So, like the 22 had that spoiler brace that was loose. Looking at the spoiler itself and the impressions and like the decal, I could see that it was tightened at some point, but at that, but the bolt was missing, and the rule says if the bolt's not fastened, you fail. So NASCAR is being consistent there, and I appreciate that. But it's also, there's opportunities now to have some gray areas and some subjectivity if you really wanted to. But I would still lean on the side that they are on right now of like it's black and white. We say you gotta have this. If it's not there, it's not there. Even if it fell off accidentally, it's like it's unfortunate. Now you know next time to tighten it some more. So that's kind of my perspective. I think over the last 2 years specifically, because they're showing these parts that they're punishing people for and showing all these pieces, it's really helped for me to at least appreciate what they go through and what they inspect. And I've been fortunate to go through the technical inspection process as a cup mechanic and see how all that stuff works. So I understand what they're doing and how they're doing. And there are a lot of steps there. And, at the Daytona 500 a couple of years ago, working on the 84, we failed a couple of times. And it's really chasing small details. Like we failed for a toe shim that was off by like a couple hundredths or something. It was very, very small stuff, but it's hugely important at a super speedway. So you're chasing some of these small incremental gains. And a lot of times it's also about, hey, you move the car this way or that way. If it's small stuff, it might shift or it might settle, get warmer or colder. So everybody's like on the ragged edge, and then you can have small things that change and just cause failures. But I think generally I appreciate what they've been doing, especially over the last couple of years.
I feel like, and maybe you disagree on this, and that's perfectly fine, obviously, that most of the time when we see these teams getting a penalty, to me, it feels like it's not intentional, like the teams are trying to cheat of sorts, that something went wrong, that, they miscalculated something, that it doesn't seem intentional, at least to me, most of the time. And you look at NASCAR's penalties, like what blows my mind is you might have a point penalty where it's more than the points that they could have possibly earned in that race. And I'm saying to myself, so would it have been better for them just to not show up at all then? Like that's where I kind of draw the line where I find things
Yeah.
a little absurd there, Bozy.
Yeah, and it's a tough balance, and that's the nature of the racing. If you do a really good job of playing on the lines, playing on those edges, it's just everything is going to look like it's just right, or it's going to look like it's an accident. So that's kind of how I approach when I explain some of these disqualifications. I sit down and I look at it. If I'm doing something to that part, can I immediately see a benefit? And 9 times out of 10, as soon as I see what rule's been violated, I have an immediate idea of how I can play with that part to make the car go faster. So that's kind of the I guess the intelligence and creativity of some of these engineers and crew chiefs and mechanics is that they're able to project something as accidental, even if it is a performance advantage. And that's kind of the nature of racing, really. And I've been on the other side of it and I understand it. And I if somebody if you're doing something and somebody asks you if you're a really good mechanic or a really good engineer, you'll have a very good reason of why something could have happened on accident and not give them the 40 pages of research you've done of how you're going to get an extra couple of tenths because this thing is going to fall that way or one thing is going to bend that way. So that's a sign that if you think if your first impression after seeing something is that it's probably accidental, my my immediate impression of that is that whoever designed whatever they designed did a really good job. If something looks very apparent, then my usual reaction is that there's something else that's being hidden that's even bigger. So that's kind of how that goes, and that's why I think NASCAR started explaining some of these things, because if you only hear the team side, that's the only thing you're going to hear. And I think a good example of it is the Jesse Love deal with that rear axle. When I saw the rule, I was like, all right, maybe they pulled a shim or two or put a washer in there that crushed to cause a gap. And then I saw a video of the actual part, and the NASCAR official just flinging the truck arm around. So it was not something that was like a small shim that got crushed or missed. Like, this was something they spent probably considerable time designing, so it would crush one way and cool off and shrink another way, and it didn't shrink like they expected and left this huge gap. So that's kind of the neat thing with them sharing these parts, is you can quickly tell. And the same thing going back to the spoiler on the 22. There's a possibility that it was accidental, but there is also a possibility that they took the nut that holds that brace and shaved it off, or did some modification to it so the vibrations of just being on track would make it come out eventually. And if you had that happen, then what that allows is for the spoiler to lean back a little more than what you would want it to, be for tech purposes. But that means you have less drag and you're faster in a straight line. That helps in a super speedway. So there's always a reason. Like I said, probably 9 times out of 10, there's a reason for a performance advantage, even if it might look accidental.
Let me ask you real quick, and then Dom jump in here. A lot of talk, I feel like, also is much about this next gen car, as we're what 3-4 years into this now, and the next gen car, we've seen it look really good at times at mile-and-a-half tracks, and the plate tracks, the drafting tracks, we've seen some good, we've seen some bad, and then the road courses, it's been pretty solid, but then the short tracks, it's been pretty bad as far as that goes. With where the next gen car is at, Posey, what do you make of where things stand right now? What does NASCAR need to do to improve that product and get more out of it, so we can see better racing and and also to help out the teams? What can they do with the next gen car, you think?
I mean, they're going to have to retool it at some point, like make some changes solely for the reason that the teams have now had almost 5 years to learn the car. And I think that's where a lot of these things that we've seen in the last year or two are coming from, is the teams have studied the cars extensively and they've developed them to a point now that all the big teams are performing at a high level, but very closely at a high level. So that's where a lot of that comes in. And then there are some inherent characteristics of the car, like the tire and the underbody, that have impact on certain races. But it's just the nature of the teams learning the cars. So, 2022, nobody really knew much. So there was an opportunity for a lot of different teams to win and do things. But then as people started learning, they made things better and better and better. And now you get to a point where, we get teams like JGR, Hendrick, and Penske with all their resources that they always come out on top. And that's not a surprise to anybody that knows, what's inside those shops. But it also means that they're all going to run fairly equally just based on the investment they've made to improve the cars. As far as like the intermediates, most of the intermediates I think race very well. There are, certain tracks that just the nature of the track, like Texas, having PJ1 for a portion of it and having some bumps and things that aren't great for this car. But in general, I think they race really, really well on intermediates. I think that like a lot of people might have been disappointed in what they saw at Kansas, but that's just the nature of a top team and an elite driver and an elite crew chief and engineers and mechanics and pit crew doing their job and running away with it. There's nothing that's inherently wrong with the car there. Super speedways is another thing of, teams have learned things and now they're using it because the super speedway package hasn't changed since 2022 and they raced completely differently in 2022. But as teams learned the efficiency and the numbers of the cars, they moved to this theory of fuel saving, and that's again is just what teams have learned. I think there might be some opportunities there to adjust stages maybe or change fuel cell sizes, but again, that's another expense, and who knows how long that will work because the teams will just figure out how to adapt to it. The short tracks, really, the only thing I can say there is they just need to put some more power in the cars, and they'll race better at short tracks because they'll overpower the tires. I think right now they have too much tire for the short tracks, and I don't think Goodyear's going to put a narrower tire on the car. So NASCAR just needs to put more tire, put more power in the car, so tires will wear more than they do right now. And I think that would instantly improve short track racing.
You hear that a lot, Tyler. You hear about the short track racing kind of just being the Achilles heel of this car. But I do want to ask you, Bozi, too, because I remember Dale Earnhardt Jr. making some comments a few years back, maybe it was on his podcast, about at least in the Gen 4 era, the car of tomorrow era, you would hear about like technical inspection and the crew chiefs really pushing the envelope. And of course, I know we can't really do that in a next gen era, but the driver maybe necessarily didn't know so much about what was going on with the technical stuff and behind the scenes. But with you working with Jimmy Johnson, like you got to see, at least from your perspective in 2023, maybe how hands-on are drivers more so with the cars, at least knowing more of the under the hood stuff or the technical stuff? Or is it still like how Dale Earnhardt Jr. described from 15 years ago, where drivers are kind of, I don't want to say in the dark, but maybe more so leave that to the rest of the team and the crew chief?
Elite drivers are incredibly involved and they help develop the car, the setups and everything. So that's especially with limited practice time these days. So somebody like Jimmy is going to spend a lot of time in the driver in the loop simulator with the crew chief and with the engineers to help develop the setup before, the car ever gets to the track. And that's pretty standard now for every top team. I would say, the top 25 to maybe top 30 drivers in Cup even are spending significant time in the driver in the loop simulators provided by their OEMs. A lot of them have static simulators at their shops. And some teams obviously will have, say, one or two drivers that spend more time there than others, because there are still some drivers that are kind of old school. But you could take any driver and sit down with them and have a very technical conversation, and they will be incredibly in the loop, even if they're not doing the simulation. But over the last, really since 2020, because practice has been so limited, they haven't had a choice but to be involved from that aspect if they want to get better. And a lot of them have also ventured out to other series to just try to pick up more skill sets.
So based on that too, so like all these DQs that we've been seeing this year across all three series, is it safe to say then that more of these drivers, they're maybe not as caught off guard by the disqualification? Maybe they're still surprised, but they are, okay, well, I know what's going on with that part, or they have more of that technical education, if you will.
It really just depends on the part. If it's something that the driver needs to know in order to make sure the car doesn't wreck, then that'll be something they'll be intensely in tune with. But a lot of times the driver may not find out about it until after whatever's happened has happened in a race. Because if you don't tell them, then they have no knowledge to, if somebody asks them about something, they're not going to know. But if it is something, you know, like going back to, the Jesse Love example, if it is something like that where the car could be very unpredictable and could give you the feeling that, it might break loose even when it's not, then you want to tell the driver, hey, we're going to do this. But then again, most drivers expect that the team's going to try to put as much flex in the rear end as possible at a track like Rockingham to to help it turn and help maximize aero. So that's kind of the thing is drivers will have a basic idea of the goals of the car at any given point, but they may not know the specific nuts and bolts of one or two pieces until it's shared with them in a debrief after a race or a competition meeting.
That makes a lot of sense too. And I guess again, just as an outsider looking in, I think back to like the late 2010s and that Gen 6 car, Martin Truex Jr., Cole Pearn, they seem to have a lot of those intermediate tracks figured out. And again, just speculating here, but you would see when they would win a race, a lot of those burnouts, a lot of the rear tire wells that would be just torn to shreds. Is that something? I'm not accusing Truex or Pearn of anything, but in the event a driver wins, are they told maybe have at it there on that victory burn down or scrub the wall a little bit? How much of that is discussed in some of those meetings?
I think that there's definitely always discussions, and it goes back to basic stuff of like, hey, on the cool down lap, pick up some marbles if you're trying to make weight or something like that. And it can vary, to certain other things. And one of the things that's fairly unique to NASCAR, especially in the Xfinity and Cup Series and the Truck Series too, is if there's a certain level of damage to the car, then NASCAR may give you some flexibility when you go to the inspection station, because if something's broken, they can't reliably inspect it, so they might give you a pass on it. So I think in a lot of cases, that's in the back of a driver's mind, whether they've been told specifically about something or not by a crew chief or engineer. If they have a hunch that maybe something was tweaked that could be outside the rules, and they can take an opportunity to damage something on the car, then they get to skip that part of the technical inspection process. So, I mean, I think there's always, opportunities for that, but it's hard to say which specific ones or who knows what or, how that goes. But the knowledge is out there for everybody, and it just depends on how they wish to use it.
I got one more question, and then we can move on unless Dominic's got anything else. One of the big conspiracy theories out there, Bozy, is in regards to championship weekend that we see almost every single year, not every year, but almost every single year, especially on the Cup side, that the Final Four has such an advantage that they're usually running in the top five, if not one, two, three, four, so much faster than everybody else. And sure, they are, in theory, the four best remaining teams, but we haven't seen hardly any penalties come from championship four teams over the years in the final race. Do you think that they're given a little wiggle room, a little leverage of sorts in these championship events? I would imagine the last thing NASCAR wants to do is vacate a win from the guy they just crowned the champion.
I don't think it's necessarily that they're getting, some flexibility from the series. I think it's more of the fact that they're getting most or all of the resources from their teams and sometimes even from the OEMs that are backing them. So what you're seeing here, especially in the next gen era, maybe in the Gen 6 or Gen 5 era, they might have gotten a pass for some small things that they wouldn't get during the regular season. But in the next gen era, there isn't an easy way to work around the rules. So what I believe we're seeing is just the effects of how these organizations are structured. So if you have a team like Joe Gibbs Racing that has four cars and one of them makes it into the final four, the only goal for Joe Gibbs Racing or somebody like Hendrick that has four cars is to make sure that the car that's vying for a championship has the best of everything. So what that means is they might show up to the track with four completely different setups for practice. And what they'll have is, all four of those they'll compare, and whatever car is the fastest, that setup will then get transferred to the championship car. And the same thing with, pit stop priority or whatever else. If they have some crew members that are faster for one car or another, they might get transferred to to the other one. So obviously they want, all of their cars to perform well, but I think that's part of what we're seeing here, and that can go all the way up to the OEM level. So, last year, I think Tyler Reddick was the only Toyota there. So they had support from Toyota, TRD from the OEM level, but they also had support from Joe Gibbs Racing as, somebody that they have a technical alliance with for the Toyota programs. So not only did they have the resources of their two-car team at their disposal, they had the resources really of them and Joe Gibbs Racing plus all of TRD behind them. So now they're spending the whole weekend with maybe 6 possible cars that they're getting information from in order to make this one car faster. And I think that's really what we see in these cases is teams that are working together plus teams that are working with their OEM or technical alliances. And occasionally we'll see cars that are outside of those combinations that'll be faster just because they hit on a really good setup. And we saw that with Ross Chastain a few years ago. I think maybe it was last year, whatever, he was faster than the championship floor, and that was partly because they didn't really have a dog in the fight, so to say, because Hendrick and Chevy kind of pulled all their resources for that, and since Trackhouse didn't have a car in the championship floor, they were only focused on their own stuff, so they got to be faster than the championship floor. So I think it's really just pulling of resources that allows that stuff to happen.
That makes a lot of sense. And before we move on to our news and notes segment here, Bozi, just again, from a curious standpoint, somebody who has been on the inside there, like say a team like Legacy Motor Club and getting to work with Jimmy Johnson, what are you liking on as far as what you've seen the last couple of years? It seems like Legacy has certainly stepped up. We know they're not the premier TRD team right now, but it seems like the team is moving in the right direction. John Hunter Nemechek has already matched a career best with 4 top tens this year. What are you liking from what you're seeing with Legacy? And heck, is there a chance we see you back at Legacy Motor Club at some point?
I think they're developing a lot of internal stuff and trying to find the right people and the combination of the right people, and that's slowly starting to come together. What the big piece at Legacy is that they're developing a lot of their simulation and database from scratch. So the way this works from an OEM perspective, an OEM uh, engineering arm like TRD will provide you with the driver in the loop simulator. They'll provide you with the basic database of information, but the detailed kind of secondary database that ties into the first one is what the teams develop themselves. And that's really where the secret sauce lies. So Joe Gibbs Racing has developed their own database that connects to the primary database with all the setup information since the next gen car started testing. 2311 pays Joe Gibbs Racing a hefty fee in order to access that database, and then they can develop their own setups based on that. Legacy Motor Club decided to go on their own because they didn't want to continue to pay for a long time, to Joe Gibbs Racing to be able to access something like this. So everything that Legacy Motor Club does is basically just trying stuff out and then building like bits and pieces until they figure out something slightly better. So they've been building this database now for multiple years, and it's something from my perspective, I think is probably 5 to 7 year process to get to like 90% of where JGR is. So I think where they're at now is not surprising, just based on the resources they have behind it and what that looks like to create some of these things, because this is, pages and pages and pages worth of stuff for every track in this database, and then every different car, and then rules obviously change, so they have to adapt to it. So it's something that I think is about where I would expect it to be at this point, considering the resources they have and what they've invested and what they're doing. For me, I don't think that I have any plans to go back there anytime soon, but I might jump into some NASCAR stuff at some point, maybe later this year or next year. I'm kind of looking around just uh, little by little, but I want to try really some kind of old school stuff. So I want to see if I can hop in and do some Xfinity races or maybe some truck races. Just because I want to try some of that stuff firsthand. I know it from a theoretical perspective. I understand the parts and the pieces, but it's also very different if you can go through the process of building a car, setting it up, going through a race weekend, just to learn some of the small intricacies that might be specific to that type of car. So that's kind of what I'm looking at right now, is just maybe hopping into one of those deals if there's the right opportunity that comes along that, I find to be fun.
Any
That's
team will
great.
be lucky to have him, Tyler.
No doubt. No doubt about it. Dom, let's get to our news and notes, our top headlines in the sports this week. Where do we want to start?
We're going to be talking a lot about the All-Star race in the next few minutes, but we're going to start too with maybe a surprise, maybe not a surprise. Harrison Burton making a return to the NASCAR Cup Series this weekend. Burton, by being locked into the All-Star race because of his Daytona win in August of last year, will be doing a one-off deal with Rick Ware Racing in the 51 car. So Cody Ware, the usual driver in that seat, is vacated. He's running the 15 car, the second entry for Rick Ware Racing in the All-Star Open this weekend. But Harrison Burton will be among the 20 guaranteed drivers of the 23 total drivers that will race in the All-Star event this weekend. Really cool, Tyler, to see Harrison Burton get this one-off opportunity. He earned a spot. He won at Daytona. Might as well take advantage of it.
Before this current playoff system, this was the big deal, was that if you won the year prior or leading up to the All-Star race, that you'd be locked into the All-Star race. And now with the playoff format, I think people have kind of forgotten about that. But Harrison Burton got to make the playoff, won at Daytona. He obviously gets demoted to the Xfinity Series. But Bozi, I'm happy for him that he got this opportunity, that he gets rewarded for that Daytona win. I don't expect him to do much, but still cool for him, I think, to get this chance in the All-Star race there with Rick Ware Racing.
I think it's a smart move for everybody because Rick Ware Racing has a guaranteed entry all the way into the All-Star race. So there's going to be, if you make the race, you have prize money attached to it. So that's that's an immediate win for them, and it's an immediate really win for Harrison because he gets to drive a Cup car again and show, that maybe he's got some stuff that he's learned or whatever else there might be in that scenario. So I think this just completely makes sense in all regards, and everybody probably will get to take home some money no matter where they end up, and it gives Rick Ware the opportunity to guarantee that their car or one of their cars is in the All-Star race.
Well, and also too, I would add to this, Bozy, that getting a different driver in there is a great opportunity for them to get some feedback on how their cars are running, get a different voice in. I know it's an exhibition race and we're not going to be coming back to North Wilkesboro again, but I still would have to think that's valuable information for that team.
Absolutely, and it'll be helpful, at a place like Martinsville that they'll race again later in the year. So I think it works out on all kind of in all aspects. And if Cody is able to get the other car qualified in, then they get two cars in the race and have information they can share back and forth directly in that race as well.
Yeah, no question about it. Dom, what else we got?
We look ahead to the 40th installment of the NASCAR All-Star Race weekend, and we're going to break down a little bit of the format and how that's all going to work this weekend. So this is the third time NASCAR is coming to North Wilkesboro for the All-Star event. And Tyler, it's somewhat of a throwback to the pre-pandemic days where you have a 3-day show for the NASCAR Cup Series. You have All-Star and Open qualifying on Friday, May 16th, where you're going to have 3 laps, including a pit stop, and there's a pit crew challenge tied to all of that. You're going to have heat races on Saturday, which will determine inside and outside rows. There are 2 heat races, 60 laps each. And then on Sunday, May 18th, you have the Open. You have 100 laps, and all laps count. Overtime rules are in effect with 1 attempt. You have a competition break around lap 40, and your top 2 finishers are going to advance into the All-Star race. Now, keep in mind, you have 20 drivers who are guaranteed and locked into that event, but 2 drivers will transfer in that way. 1 driver is going to earn the fan vote, and then when you get to the All-Star race, 250 laps. All laps are going to count. Overtime rules are in effect. Doesn't seem like there's a 1 attempt limit here, at least for the All-Star race. And a competition break around lap 100. You're also going to have the option for a promoter's caution, where a random caution could be thrown, but it has to be done before lap 220. So all of these elements, the All-Star race weekend, they're racing for $1 million. We've talked about it on the show. It seems like maybe the race winning amount hasn't matched with inflation over the years, but nonetheless going to be a cool exhibition and a cool break of sorts as we ramp up for the second half of the regular season after.
Yeah, they've been given $1 million since what, the 90s? Yeah, inflation hasn't kept up. I don't get excited about somebody winning $1 million over this. The rich get richer. It's the way I look at it. But The thing I like, Bozy, about All-Star Weekend, that might be my favorite of all, is that pit crew challenge. When those guys get to take center stage and play a pivotal role and they get recognized. We see on the broadcast, they're actually showing all the crew guys and their stats for the season. I wish they did that for every race and gave us that background. To me, that's a cool thing about this is just seeing other guys get recognized, the team as a whole, besides just the driver and crew chief.
No, I think that is very, very awesome that they have the opportunity to shine on their own. I like that the Pit Crew Challenge is an event that continues to exist and that they're continuing to kind of tweak and develop. I would love to see it go back to the days of where, it was in an arena and you have individual challenges and stuff like that. But I think the fact that, Fox or FS1, I don't know exactly who's going to be showing it, is going to be focusing on these individual crew members is a pretty huge deal. And they obviously do interviews with the individuals on the teams if they do well. And it's a neat way to highlight some of these guys up close because a lot of times in races, especially during like stage breaks and yellow flag cycles, you'll have a lot of cars pitting and they'll pick two or three or four cars to focus on, where here it's one by one. So you can really see the differences and the intricacies of the choreographies and all these things that these teams do differently. And especially now with so many teams developing different things around the jack and how the jackman moves, it'll be nice to be able to showcase that and see what everybody's developed over the winter and what they're doing to be fast right now.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Dom, how about the odds? What do those look like?
So the opening odds for the All-Star race this weekend. Any surprise? Your 2023 winner of this race and the defending Kansas race winner, Kyle Larson, at the top of the opening odds per the Caesar Sportsbook at plus 500 or 5-1. Denny Hamlin at plus 550. Christopher Bell at plus 600. Ryan Blaney, who won the All-Star race at Texas in 2022 at plus 650. William Byron, plus 750. Last year's winner, Joey Logano, at plus 850. And Chase Elliott at plus 950. Tyler Reddick would be next at plus 1,600. And as you work your way down the list, your longest of the shots, if you will, of the guys that are guaranteed in the All-Star race, maybe no surprise, Harrison Burton in that 51 car at plus 35,000 or 350 to 1.
Okay. Who do you like this week, Bozy? Who catches your eye?
That's a good question. I'm actually thinking about that and think that I'm going to lean towards Denny Hamlin, Ryan Blaney, or William Byron. Just knowing their results on this tire recently, I think they're all able to handle it fairly well. And really, it's going to be a question of how they qualify. And because the Pit Crew Challenge is part of qualifying, I'm going to go towards Denny Hamlin. Just because his pit crew's been doing really well this season. I expect them to be one of the contenders in the Pit Crew Challenge, and I think that we'll see them help him qualify up front. So I'll go with Hamlin.
I'll go with Hamlin as well. He's been very good on the short tracks. You mentioned Martinsville being maybe the most similar track. He obviously won that a few weeks ago. I think it's going to be tough to beat Denny Hamlin. I think any normal week we'd be talking about Kyle Larson, but this is going to be unusual circumstances with everything going on in Indy, and we don't know if he's going to miss some on-track action potentially. But I'll go with Denny Hamlin. How about you, Dom?
I think this is going to be a first in the 181 episodes we've done the show that the entire panel picks the same driver. Denny Hamlin's going to get it done this week, and I think in the All-Star race.
Okay, there you have it. Those are our picks for this week. We'll get to our mailbag segment next, where you can submit questions to us. DavidStarPodcast at gmail.com. Also on X and Facebook at Star Podcast. You can find us there. And the first question comes from Eddie. He wants to know, guys, should the All-Star race award the winner playoff points? Bozy, let's start with you. What do you think? Should this remain an exhibition, or would you like to see some points awarded?
It should remain an exhibition. I think, uh, putting playoff points with it, and you're just putting it as part of the season. So if that's the case, then it's not really an all-star race. It's just an additional points race. So I don't see it needing a playoff points added.
Yeah, I agree. And Dom, the thing I would say too is that like another reason why I would not want points added to it is that not everybody is in it. You have new drivers every single year that change teams, and I just it's supposed to be an exhibition for one, but just the fact that everybody's not in it, I don't think that would necessarily be fair.
I think from an entertainment standpoint, it would make it a little more interesting, but I have to side with you guys as well. Let's keep it an exhibition race. We already kind of see this in a way where you earn stage points, if you will, in the dual races in Daytona. So they're not necessarily exhibition races, they're not points races, they're this kind of in between thing. So maybe we already see that kind of happen, but I do like that question. It makes you wonder how much that would change the strategy, and you would think too, because you have 40 cars on the track. You're not having that with the All-Star race weekend. It'd be different circumstances, but I would imagine, Tyler, it would make teams maybe think outside the box a little bit if NASCAR were to present something like that.
Now, I will say I do like the idea of potentially some mass the All-Star race. One idea I saw floating around out there was, what if you let the Xfinity and truck champions in this, but then you got to find them a cup car to give them the access to do that. Um, Another idea, you couldn't do this at where we're going this week at North Wilkesboro, but what about like a multi-class race, like kind of like what we see in IMSA? What if you could get Xfinity, Cup, and truck cars all on the same track, the best of the best in all three of those series? I think that, with it being an exhibition race, there's tons of opportunities, Bozy, to get creative with this, I think.
I think that it would be fun to see a multi-class race, but just from kind of a safety perspective, it probably would have to happen on a road course. Putting these different types of cars on a big oval would create some unpredictable situations that just because of the way the bodies are different. So, but on a road course, it would not be as intense and it would kind of mimic what we've seen in sports car racing. So that would be my suggestion if they were to do a multi-class race is to put it on a road course. And if it's an exhibition race, then find something that's really unique that may not be a regular season destination.
Dom, what about you? What type of changes would you like to see the All-Star race?
Man, good question. I think the multi-class thing would be a very interesting take. I've seen that idea floated around about what you've mentioned about maybe adding a playoff point to the mix. I think anything that maybe like even the creativity where you saw teams saying that they didn't want to bring anything that you could to the All-Star race week, and maybe that adds expenses, like Hamlin said on his podcast. But nonetheless, something like that, like where you get creativity, where you get maybe to open up that box a little bit more, would be very fascinating to see. But then again, I know that NASCAR will kind of play around with different things. I think they played with the option tire a few years back, and we've seen that implemented in Cup races. So you do see some creativity from the All-Star race that can bleed out into other parts of the regular season. But I don't know. It seems like maybe we may move the venue around a little bit among other SMI tracks might be another way to look at that as well.
Yeah, maybe so. Next question in the inbox comes from Thomas. Thomas wants to know, Bozy, if there was one thing in NASCAR you could change, what would it be and why?
Oh, that's a really good question. Huh. Uh, See, I have to think hard about this now because I haven't really considered it recently since they don't change a lot. But I would say probably stage lengths at some of these races. So the Coca-Cola 600 is a good example. I had a conversation about this with some friends recently. So the Coca-Cola 600 is four 100 lap stages. And what it ends up being is four mini races kind of playing over and over and over again. My perspective is that you should stagger the stages and make one really big stage at the end to create some strategy. So instead of, four times 100, I would do, 50, 50, 100, 200. And what you end up with there is the first two stages. You could run to the end of the stage on a full fill, so you wouldn't have to stop for fuel. So you would be, just doing a stop at the stage break, and on the third stage, you'd have to stop at some point during the stage. Some people might flip the stage, so it gives you some of the traditional options. But then you get to the fourth stage where you would have to stop multiple times, and then you could have multiple strategy options. And that fourth stage, you create a bunch of excitement versus just the options of, hey, when are these people stopping halfway through the stage and is a caution coming out? If it's 200 laps and you have to stop 2 or 3 times depending on your strategy, you create all of these options and all of this excitement and unknown if it's presented properly. So that would be one thing that I would suggest changing, is staggering some of the stage lengths so they're not just either split in half or try to split it if it's close to the end. Because there's a lot of races, where you can make it 90% of the way to the end of the stage and then either save fuel or try to flip it or this other stuff. If they're spread out more or if there's bigger margins, then it just gives opportunities for strategy and to create exciting finishes.
I like that. I would like to see the playoff format changed where we're not resetting the points after every single round. And I think the championship four, you have too many drivers that maybe aren't worthy of that chance to win the championship. I would cut it down to two and make it the final two get the chance to, who are at the top two get the chance to compete for the championship or something like that. Those are some things off the top of my head. How about you, Dom?
Off the top of my head, I loved seeing it during the pandemic because it was made out of necessity, but seeing midweek racing and come to find out, I guess drivers had been pushing for this in the 80s and 90s, and NASCAR maybe wasn't warming up to the idea, but when it was forced because they needed to make the time up during the schedule, we saw creativity. We saw Kansas host a Wednesday night NASCAR Cup race. They could do that because they had lights. We saw Martinsville do the same thing because they had the lights. Pocono hosting the double headers. So adding double headers and adding midweek racing, I think there could be a market for it because at the end of the day, Tyler, we're looking and these are made for TV events. And what better to have a Wednesday night primetime race or a Saturday and Sunday type thing during the season? And plus, you shorten the season in that regard too, or you give the opportunity for more breaks during the season. I feel like the industry as a whole would all probably like that because it's a long season. It's 10 months out of the year.
Yeah, it's a great point. Bozi, before we wrap up and get out of here, what's kind of going on with you? Where can people follow you and see all the stuff you're doing and where you're headed to next?
So people can find me on just about every form of social media. It's just my name at Bozi Tatarevic. And they also can find me in Road and Track, motorsport.com, race car engineering with my writing. I've started doing a podcast called The Bozi Breakdown. And so it all kind of combines there. I think, let's see, my next event that I'm planning to visit is the All-Star Weekend here in North Wilkesboro, since I'm based in North Carolina. So I'll go over there, check out some of that racing and see if I can find something interesting to write about. And then after that, I'm planning to go to Indianapolis for the Indy 500. And then I'll come home for a few days and then go to Detroit to compete in the Detroit GP for the IMSA weekend there. So next few weekends, there's all kinds of stuff stacked up.
Love it. Well, what about you, Dom?
Be a home weekend here, and we're gonna be celebrating some graduations milestone. As you know, Martin Vigil, my brother-in-law, graduating from nursing school at the University of New Mexico. The very, very big milestone that we're all proud of. We'll be spending the weekend with him. And I just got to say, before we flip it back to you, Tyler, Bozi, it's been awesome having you on the show. A few years back, we had Joe Dan Bailey, who was with Toyota Racing Development at that time, engineer. And I felt like Tyler and I were just students of the sport on that podcast and getting to learn a lot more about the ins and outs and what makes a race car go. And I felt like we got that today. So thank you for joining us, by the way.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
How about you, Tyler? What do you got going on the next few days and this weekend?
I'm off to Wichita, doing one last basketball tournament for Puma's Pro 16 League on Peacock. So I'll be doing that on Friday night and then back to Dallas for the rest of the weekend after that. So that's what I'm up to. Going to be all good here on that front. Bozi, we appreciate you joining us. We'd love to have you back sometime in the future, man. Some great insights today. Much appreciated. Thanks for stopping by. Appreciate you, the listener, for being here with us as well. Subscribe to the show. New episodes out each and every week. Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, YouTube, wherever you're listening to podcasts. Leave us a 5-star review or don't leave us one at all. Hit the like button as well. We certainly would appreciate it. And check out this show along with the rest of the Studio Soapbox Network, the Jones Report, Coach Mono's podcast, and all podcast platforms. We'll put the checkered flag out on this edition of Let's Go Racing. Bozi, Dominic, our entire crew, I'm Tyler Jones. Thanks so long. This has been another edition of Let's Go Racing. We'll see you next week.